It was always really, really cold in there. And now that it's been better insulated, and it will be getting a heat pump, and it has a door to close it off, so it will become a place for us to store all our documents and quilts, textiles and things that we now have upstairs in our office, and they'll come down here, and it's a much better storage place.
Money, we're gonna keep the money in there too.
And the money goes there too.
What money?
That brings me to the next point. So, we like to have just free programs, but we welcome any donations. We have a little donation box out there. And if you'd like to drop something in there, we appreciate it, but it's all gonna go towards finishing that off, so.
What else
Thanks
is
for
coming?
coming. Next.
Happy March 7th.
March 7th, yes, 2 weeks. We're having the next beach bistro dinner.
Oh, wow, so
It's
soon.
going to be, this time it's going to be celebrating the Lunar New Year. It's an Asian dinner.
Ooh, wow.
So it's the year, do you know what year this is? The year
Year of the horse.
Fire horse.
Yeah, so we're gonna have a dinner, the 7th, on Saturday night, but that will be online, and we sell tickets online. I don't know if some of you have come to our dinners. If you haven't been, it's a lot of fun. We managed to fit 36 people in here. We have round tables, and you just come and sit down, and we'll serve you a good dinner. So we're gonna cook it. My daughter-in-law, Hanji Chang, is our cook.
Good cook.
And she's a good cook, and along with a crew of helpers.
Do we
we're
have to
gonna
use
put
chopsticks?
together, we will have both. We'll have both.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the 7th.
And then what's coming in April? Something's coming in April.
Oh, the doll show, the doll tea. Oh, yes, we're having a doll show and a tea party.
Tea party.
Tea party, yeah. That's a Saturday afternoon.
And then what's coming in June?
Oh, in June, we've got a radio play. Want to say a little something about that?
Yes, we're gonna do a old-fashioned radio play with a spaghetti supper on Friday night. And then we're gonna do an old-fashioned radio play, same one, on Saturday night with a spaghetti supper. And then we're gonna do a matinee. So if you can't come Friday, you can come Saturday. If you can't come
No
Friday or Saturday,
excuses.
you can come Sunday afternoon. So there's no excuses.
Rosie, who's gonna be the actors in this play?
Well,
I wonder,
Yeah.
could it be
Famous people.
board members and some of the ladies that work here and gentlemen that work here on Fridays. Every Friday morning, you have a little get
We
together.
have a
here.
work bee.
We have a work bee.
Right.
So
everybody.
we'll have everybody will be involved. It'll be extremely entertaining, I guarantee it. And if not, don't worry about it, we're not gonna give back your money. So, without further ado, let me just tell you about this guy. This guy right here, I'm gonna tell you what. He is a champion of all champions. This guy can do just about anything. I've known him for a lot of years. I was just telling his granddaughter that this boy knows how to party. And we've done plays together, we've done all that, and music and all kinds of stuff. But he is a former teacher. He is also his family is also a former prisoner of war camp during World War II, and he has another whole story with that. He also, man, this guy is great jazz singer, and not only that, when he's not singing jazz, he's doing polka. But he's also a great historian, and he's going to tell us tonight about one of his family members, Henry Lunn.
I'll try to make sure that I don't keep you from your beds.
We'll do this.
Yes, I'll watch. But you know what? Sometimes, Rosie, I don't pay attention.
I will get your attention.
Okay, first of all, I want to thank you very much, because this is 250 years of America. And unfortunately, and I will challenge all of you here tonight, that scratch a little bit on your heredity and you will find that you will have some of those American patriots, the heroes of the 1770s, 75, 76, and because that's what happened to me. One time, when I was in high school, my mother came home and she was all dressed up. She had a beautiful white gown on and so forth and so on, and mom and dad came in and so forth. I said, "Where have you been?" And she says, "Oh, we just came from a DAR meeting." I said, "What's a DAR?" It means Daughters of the American Revolution. I said, "Well, how do you work? How does this work with you?" I didn't know anything about this. And he says, "Do you know Fred Putnam down in Holton?" I said, "Yeah, he's the banker." I said, "His ancestors and our family happened to be the Lowrys, in good Irish folks up in Monticello. Somewhere back there, in that time, some of our people were in Putnam's army. If you go to Holton sometimes, look up at the big white house up there. It's what they call Black Hawk House. He was named that by the Native Americans because he was fighting in the French and Indian Wars, and so here he is. So you train that back, and I said, "Do you have? Can I find out about that?" And she says, "Yes," and she hands me this book, and in it is our whole lineage about from that period of time up to the present. I made out the application for DAR and I never submitted it. But in so doing, I found out about a whole lot of things. Now my dad, okay, he's a Scot-Irish. His people came over from over there about, I don't know, maybe the 1800s. But here's what I found out. My grandfather's wife, her name was Briggs. And then I thought, Briggs, that's interesting. We got Briggs all over Camden, or all over Monticello, all over that territory, a whole bunch of them. I said, how do they fit? And I said, well, Gramp married Fanny. Lunn married Fanny. Fanny, his daughter, marries a Briggs. And then I get to looking at that. And guess what? One day, I'm digging around on this genealogy stuff, and I came to this piece of paper. And I looked at it and I said, what the heck is this? So, let me read. 1770, the Chase and the Porters and the Briggs family lived in Rhode Island, Massachusetts, but they were loyalists, and they were being treated pretty badly in Rhode Island, in Warren, actually. And so they left there and went to a little town called Freetown, Massachusetts. Now, in so doing, he had children. The oldest, the youngest one, his name was Abiel Briggs. Abiel Briggs, being a loyalist of the loyalist family. Excuse me, folks. You have technology like this in your ears. Anyway, so he says, well, what are you doing? You're packing. What's going on? He says, we are headed for Canada because we don't like the fact that we're being persecuted again here in Freetown because we're loyalists. And they said, when are you going? And they said, we have already signed the pledge that we will go with the Porters and the Chases and so forth. Now, on the Chase family was a girl who was 16. Abiel liked her a lot. But in the next few weeks, they go to Boston and they head for St. John, New Brunswick. And that's where they landed, as loyalists. Now, Abiel looked at this situation, and he'd been hanging out downtown with what a bunch of guys called the Sons of Liberty. If you were British, you called them sons of something else. So, but he'd been hanging out with these Sons of Liberty, and also guys who had fought in the French and Indian Wars. And so doing, he started hearing about what was going on. It's like watching the news. He started getting the picture from these guys that the British were a bunch of scoundrels and murderers and so forth and so on. Boston Massacre and so forth. So he came home that day and they had the paper there for him to sign that he pledged his life to the king. He looked at that and he says, I have freedom, but I do not have liberty. And he refused to go. The next day, he gathers up his gear, his clothing, and everything else. Picks up his rifle, his musket, no, I'm sorry. His musket. This was a trade rifle, or trade musket, that they sold to the Indians. And if you could afford one, you had one for yourself. Civilians. Because if you were military, you had a brown vest. This was 62 calibers, weighs about 15 pounds. So he gathers that up, and then the next thing he picks up is his tomahawk. So this is where you put your hawk. So he picked that up. Then he picked up his powder horn, put that around his neck, and then the next thing he did was he got his bullets. Now this is, you people here all know what a magazine is for a rifle or for a handgun. This might be the equivalent of that. Here's how it worked. Now remember, you're being shot at by somebody the same distance away as this wall over here, or that front door. So you have this. There's 6 shots in this. So you would take one of them and you would put this over the hole, over the muzzle, and you would push that out. It's already greased. So and then you ram it down with your rammer. And then, after that, whoop, a little shorter than I thought, then what you would do is you take your powder horn and you would load up there's a little pan here, and you would take that powder horn and put it in here, and you would close it up. And then when you want to fire, you've got powder and shot in this weapon at this point in time. Smooth bore, muzzle loader. Did you see the spark?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what you want to hear, and that's what you want to
Seems
see.
like it'll work better if you use it as a club.
Well, that too, and they did many times.
I was gonna say, how many people got killed while they were trying to kill the other person?
I've fired one like it. That has never been fired.
They put bayonets on you?
But I used to hunt. I have an 1812 muzzle loader, and I used to hunt rabbits with it, and it goes like this: click, clack, boom, bang, bang, bang. Anyway, so Abel, that next day, packs up his gear. Washington has been advertising it. The word is out. The men in that territory, the Sons of Liberty and all those old veterans, they knew that what was going on, that Washington is in Cambridge. The British come in and they've already surrounded and gone into Boston and so forth. So, Washington was looking for an army for a very special deal. Nobody knew about this. It was the first invasion that the United States ever did, or the colonial America ever did. They wanted to get Canada, and the way to do it was to get a hold up there, get the Quebec, get the castle or the big fortress at Quebec, the citadel. Montreal is down the river. It is up the river. And so there were two things they needed to do. They figured if they could do this, and their intel, their information said this place is lightly manned. Because remember, the French and Indian War had just taken place, and the French had been driven out. The French were in there, or the British were there. However, they were a small group. So they figured they could go up there and take them. So Abiel went into Cambridge and stood in line to be reviewed by Arnold, because Arnold was a big wheel at that time. And so they have him go down the line, and every young man and older man stood there with their muskets and their tomahawks and their food and their shirts and so forth, and they were kind of interviewed, surveyed, see whether they could do it. They said, do you know anything about the woods? Do you know anything about the wilderness? And so forth. So every man was asked that. When they got all done, they had 1,100 men standing there. And a couple of women. One of them belonged to a fella named Wagner. His wife was with him all the time. He was in command of one of the small companies. Okay, so now, there he is. And also, at the same time, he's meeting people. He's meeting other young men who came. And there was one young man, this, interestingly, his name was Mark Lunn, L-U-N. The double N was not there yet. So Mark was there because he was the same age, and he was from Connecticut. And he belonged to a company, they were artillerists guys, really, artillery people. But Mark and Abiel immediately became friends. Now, if you take a look at that time in history and time, here is a Lunn, here is a Briggs, in 250 years ago. Both young men wanting to be there because they did not like what was happening. They wanted their freedom, they wanted their liberty, and they were willing to put their life on the line. So when they got all these people lined up, there was the Green Mountain Boys. They came down, Ethan Allen, and there were also the boys down in Pennsylvania. Think I can remember that name? No, I can't. But anyway, he ran, and they were long rifle men. They were shot rifles. Now, those men all wore what is known as a rifleman's jacket. Now, there's significance to this because when they went against, when the British came and went up to the Bunker Hill and Breed's Hill, they ran into incredible firepower, and they were picking them off 200-300 yards away. Because the British, just think about the British uniform at that time. There was this big white stripe like this down them and a red coat. Now, if that is not one hell of a good target, I don't know what is. Anyway, they were picking them off. So the word gets out. Watch out for people who wear riflemen's jackets. And Arnold said, you all will wear riflemen's jackets. You will all carry tomahawks. You will all be responsible for your own food. So they got these people all together, these 1,100 of them. You had a number of people that you might be interested in hearing about. There was Arnold there with Washington. He and Washington were like this at this time. There's a fellow named General Schuyler from New York. He ran that whole that territory as far as military. And there was General Montgomery, who was actually under Schuyler. Dan Morgan was a rifleman. Green Mountain Boys, Ethan Allen. And Dr. Center was there, who had been at Bunker Hill. Then there was a guy named Aaron Burr there. And there was a guy named Captain Miggs. Talk about Miggs later. And Mr. and Mrs. Warren. And there were 2 Abenaki guides. And a guy named Captain Dearborn was there, who had a great, big, beautiful dog. So they were there, and they were all ready to go, and they were at that time. Then it was told to them what they were doing. They didn't know what they were going to be doing. Then they signed up for 2 years. They didn't know where they were going or what they were going to do. They thought they were going into the military army, the Continentals, and that they would be probably down in Boston or somewhere else to fight. But what was they told them? We are going to climb, we are going up to Canada, and we are going to liberate the French from those wicked, awful British guys. So that's all they knew. And then the other thing they said, well, how far is it? Well, they had bad intel, bad intel. They thought that it was about 180 miles
That would
from
get you
here
from Boston to here.
to there. And they figured that it would take them around maybe 30 days. It turned out it's over 300, 600 miles, over 300 miles, 300 and some miles. And then the other thing was, and I think you'll notice the dates on this, you'll notice that here they were in Newburyport, here they were in Cambridge first, okay? And then what happened is that they had, here are these men. No cars, no trucks, nothing. But they still have, if they could get from here to here, they would get there by boat. So they went down and they got a bunch of fishermen's boats, one of those stinky fisherman boats. And they put these young men and women on board, 1,100 of them, and with all of their food, which I'll talk to just a quick shot about food. Anyway, so it took them from here to get to the mouth of the Kennebec. Now, it's September already. This started out in June, July. And folks, if you look at what I'm wearing, this is linen. I probably had long johns because they used to wear long johns 360. So he probably had long johns. But he had these linen pants. And this is called a woolsey. It's a mixture of cotton and wool. I think that's correct. And so they had this and their long johns, and they might have had the vest. They had a hat like this one, or similar to it. You'll notice it's not a tri-horn cap. You know, like you see in the movies, everybody's got one of those 3-cornered hats. You'll notice that one side is turned up. And then one of the reasons for that is when you're firing your gun, you can't have this flopping down in your way. So that's where they started with that thing. And then of course later on it became a tricon. Okay, so now here they are. And they're getting ready to go uphill, up the march, up the river. As I said, bad intel. They also thought, and they'd heard, that there was this guy named Indian named Natanas. He was a bad guy. And they said, I want you, if you see him, kill him. And so, but he was a friend. And what the people didn't know, here's Natanas' little place, wigwam or something. And all the way up, Natanas would have little hints, drop things, and maybe a little arrow to show what trail to use. Now, here's 1,100 men and all of their gear, all of their food. The food, I have over here my personal food. You had about a pound of butter, a pound of oatmeal, and a pound of, pound of cornmeal and a pound of flour. And if you were lucky, you might have some butter, but not. And you had maybe a little salt, maybe a little pepper. But that's about it. And then you had a chunk of salt pork. Now the salt pork was an extremely interesting and very, very necessary piece of your gear, because you had to keep your moccasins greased, and you'd shave off little pieces of it and put it in the pot. Each company had a big iron kettle. You had to take turns carrying that thing. So when they get into camp, they would set up a fire and they would fill it full of water, and then they would start putting whatever you had. Oh yeah, I had peas and dried peas. Now, and there was also meat. But they had these barrels of meat, salt meat, a lot of it horse meat, down in Cambridge. Now, they were in hogsheads. You all know what a hogshead is? It's a great big barrel. And they would put that meat in there and then fill it full of water and salt. Now, if you were trying to get it onto a wagon, and this thing weighed one heck of a lot. So what did the guys do? They cracked the bung on that thing and poured out the salt water. So now you've got meat in there without any preservative on it. So that was there. You had a barrel of flour, many barrels of flour. If you can count it up, I had 1 pound of flour. Multiply that by 1,100 men and officers. That's how much barrels of that you had. Peas and flour. And some rice. Okay, now the next thing that happened, besides that meat's going to get rancid very fast, the next thing that happened was this. When they get up to right here, they start out here, and they go up the river here, and once they get up a ways, they start running into problems with the bateaus. The bateau is about 22 feet long, high-sided, looks like a dory, what we would call a dory around here. And so what happened was, every time that they had this thing loaded with people and loaded with all this gear, they would run into a problem and the thing would capsize. There were 10 men and all of that gear in every one of these things. Barrels, all this stuff, clothes, all that stuff was there. And that's how they started up the river. Now, what happened was, as I mentioned, is that they start running out of, well, they started capsizing. These guys had never been in a boat before. There were oars, and there were paddles, and then what they call setting poles. And that's where you take the pole and drive it down into the mud or the bottom of the wherever you are, and then that would hold you in it. Now remember, they're going against the current. The other thing I want to emphasize is that now, remember when Abel went down and joined up, it was probably in July. Okay, wearing this kind of clothes in July was perfect, was okay. Now, it is September. Now you folks who have always lived here in Maine, I think most of you have. I know a couple of people who are here for a long time. Anyway, so pretty soon they didn't have jackets. All they had was a rifleman's jacket. They didn't have wool. They had moccasins like I wear. And they had these, what they call gaiters. And you had your this kind of clothing. Now, from 16 to 19, that's how long it took us to get up through here, up in here, the 20th. Now, what happened, folks, was this. another thing that happened. The British were out here in the bay, and they were looking for us, because you think a secret? Ha! Everybody knew what the heck was going on. So when he got about here, Washington hired a couple of 3 fishermen to row out into the ocean to check to see if there are any British out there, any ships. And so they got them, and they went out, they rowed out, went out there, and they were gone for 3 days. And when they came back, they said, nope, no schooners, no British out there, all clear. So by the 20th, they land right here. Now, at the mouth of the Quebec, it's big sandbars and stuff. So what happened is, a couple of those heavily loaded bateaus had to be brought, another one had to come over, and they had to share the load. They had to unload it and then take it in where they could get water, or enough water to row in and get in. And then they put all that stuff back in. Now they have to go, and their paddles, by the way, okay, now they start up here, and they get up here to Gardnertown, where Reuben Coburn is running. He'd made a deal with Washington to supply bateaus. And when they got there, Arnold says, I need 200 more. And they said, we can't give it, but I gotta have them, and I want them right off. So the carpenters set to, and they used green lumber, and they ran out of nails. Now, you all know, you folks have done this, square nails, square cut nails, they had to be cut by hand. So they cut down the number of nails that they put into the bateaus. Green lumber, less nails. So they start up in there. Now they're weighing, instead of 200 to 300 pounds, because they're the ones that were dry, now they weigh a hell of a lot more. So they kept on going, and then they come up here to Fort Western. Now Fort Western, you all know where that is, over in Augusta. That was the trading center, been that way for centuries, no, for years. And it was a place where you could go and get things or trade, whatever. And so when they get here to Fort Western, the guys are not, they're hungry and they're tired and they are freezing. They're starting to get cold. Look at this. It's now September the 23rd. You remember what 23rd looks like here in Maine? It's starting to get a little cool. An outfit like this? No. So they get there, and then of course the other thing that happened is that good soldiers, if you can find it, you're gonna get it. I'm talking about booze. So they looked around and they found some alcohol, and the next thing you know, there's a bunch of drunk soldiers, and there's a big fight and all kinds of stuff like that. So they have a hell of a time. And so, but they leave there the next, they get, finally, here it is, the 23rd, and then they get up, here's the next one, up to Fort Halifax, which is that blockhouse in Winslow. And they finally get there, straggled in, and they are happy to see something, and they slept wherever they could. They would, if you had a house nearby, you would have some boarders right off quick. Okay, so now, here they are. So, September the 30th, okay, look at this, October. Do you remember October? It gets kind of cold. And so, they finally get to here, and it's the old Norridgewock area. This used to be an Indian village. And I mentioned this to one of the ladies here tonight. Some of the Indians came down the coast and attacked some settlers and killed them. And so the Colonials get together and they said, okay, I know where they came from. They came from Norridgewock. By the way, Norridgewock was a very peaceful place. It was run by Father Royal, and they were all good, probably all good Catholics, but they were under his control. Those Colonials came up there and they killed everyone that they could find. But the other thing that happened, that was part that. So now here's Norwalk, which is no longer a threat, but no, also it's a vacant area. So right there is a bunch of falls, and you had to get your ships or get your boats, bateaux over there. So they looked at that and they said, we can't possibly pole those bateaux 22 feet long and weigh 100 pounds, well, 100, 300, 200 pounds. So what they did, there was some farmers up in this area, believe it or not, and they had oxen. So they hired them, and they dragged the bateaux up over this falls up here. Now there was an interesting thing that happened. There were some bateaux who tried to do it. And they were the people, the men, who were carrying all of the gold and silver that was going to be used to pay the Indians and anyone else to buy things when they were there. It tipped over. And all of that money went into the water. But there was somebody watching, and they knew where it was. So jumping ahead a little bit, these two farmers all of a sudden become very prosperous. They have land, they bought land, and now they are rich because they knew where the water, where the species was. So anyway, that's the story of Norwalk. Okay, now they get going again, and now here it is October the 9th. 3 days later, they run into some more falls. Now, there's my attempt to put mountains in here. We call them the Appalachians now. They called it the height of land. And it's also known by the Indians as the Great Carrying Place. So now they're running into this mountain here, and they've got to get those canoes or their bateaux over the hill. Oh, by the way, Arnold used a birch bark canoe. He could go fast, and so that's what he did. Anyway, so they finally get over here on October the 12th. They get to the other side at this carrying place. Now I'm going to describe picking up that bateau. As I said before, it could be 200 to 300 pounds, plus all the gear, okay, that you had. You had to unload it. And here's what happened. There were 10 men to a bateau. They would lift that up and onto their shoulders and carry it, what they call the portage. They would carry it until they could put it back in the water. They said, the reports say, that before long, you could see the bones in their shoulders. Because it wore all the hide off, and here you up. But what do? You've got to have your bateau. You've got to have your. So they kept on going. Now it's cool, and now they're in the water, and they're by the way. They found out that beef that they thought was going to be there was rotten. They also found out that the peas, once they're wet, they start to rot and get bigger, and pretty soon, all of that fruit and the flour, whatever flour they could scrounge, is starting to get out of hand. And now what are they doing? They're taking their moccasins, because a moccasin was treated with grease, and they would boil them. And they would boil these belts, and they would take anything that you had that had any grease in it, and you would boil it and put it in with whatever little porridge that you could build with this. There are things called fire cakes. You mix up water and salt, a little, if you had salt, a little water and flour, and you'd mix it up, and then you would take that and daub it onto a hot rock, and you would cook it. And those are called fire cakes. I made some, and I offered some to my granddaughter out there back there last night, and she didn't want it.
I wonder why.
So anyway, so things are getting worse all the time. They're starving, and they're getting weak. Now they came to the chain of ponds. Now some of you people probably fished there, but the fish were like knee deep. They were all over the place. So they went about and they caught a whole bunch of fish. Now, there's very little fat in a fish. And so here they were gorging on fish, but it wasn't doing any good. So last time I did this, one of the folks like you said, well, why didn't they just shoot a moose? All right, now visualize this. For over several miles, the 1,100 people or less are strung out. And they had wood choppers, they had pioneers out front cutting trail. Do you know any self-respecting moose or deer that would hang around? 1,100 people coming through your backyard? No, there weren't any moose. The other thing that they wanted badly were beaver tails, because the beaver's tail is loaded with fat. And so they wanted that something fierce. And so anytime, they ate everything. They ate crows, they ate anything that they could find to put into the pot. But there's now probably, it's down now from 1,100 probably to maybe 10 or even lower than that. Maybe in the 900 people. So they get in up here on October the 12th, and they get the other side, and they hit the Dead River, and it runs out of Megantic. That runs in and then down the Kennebec. So they get here, and there's the damnedest thing, they said it was the worst hurricane and the worst rain that they did in hundreds of years. And it raised the river in some places up to 9 to 12 feet. And these people would try, the soldiers would try to find a place. We used to call them hummocks. I don't know what you call them, but in the county we call them hummocks. Out by a piece of land that's kind of stuck a little bit of a hill. And they would go on these hummocks and they would camp out. And they would get their food going and dry their clothes. And then they would try to get food and so forth. And then so they went to sleep. And then pretty soon they woke up and the water was running right down where their feet were. And now the other thing that happened is that this part of the world, this is a huge swamp right here. And what happened there is that the water gets so high here that you couldn't tell where the river really flowed. These men now are jumping in the river and to pull the canoe or pull the bateau. And the way they did it, maybe some of you have done this, but you reach out and you grab a bush and pull yourself along. The other thing is that sometimes now there's ice there. So they have to break the ice. And then it gets on you, the water gets on you, and if you're above the water, you're gonna have ice on you. Their whole uniform, their whole clothing was covered with ice. And they kept on going. This is the part that to me is the most amazing thing of all. They get here to the swamp. A couple of the battalions or regiments had evidence about bad intel, bad knowledge of what was going on. Well, you're supposed to stay on this side. You're supposed to stay on this side of this, on the western side. But what they did is they got into the swamp, and then what happened is they wound up over in here. About half of the people. And they wondered, at night they tried to figure out, where are the rest of the troops? And what had happened is they had gone into the buckabush. And so they had to find them, and the way they found them was that they looked for campfires. They finally found them, and they saved them, brought them down, and got them back on here. Now, there's something that happened, and I'm sorry I left it out. But right in here, all of this awful thing that was going on here, water, disease, men were dying from starvation and also from disease, from dysentery and from being cold, having flu, and whatever else. Anything you can imagine, they were having it. So, Captain Enos, was not equal to Benedict Arnold, but they split the troops. Enos took half and he took half. And they get down to here, and Captain Enos, he says, my men are about ready to revolt and they want to go home. And so they said, okay, you can go, but you have got to take all of the sick people with you, and you can have half of the rations, but when you're going down, you've got to give them to these other people who are still coming straggling up here. So Enos, with 250 men, leaves. That leaves now, what, 400 or 500 of the men in the expedition. Okay, Enos leaves, and he comes back, gets on the river, and then quickly, what happened to him is he's court-martialed, and that he got what he deserved. He wound up being a salesman someplace. But anyway, he left them in the lurch. He didn't care about leaving them without any food. He just took off because he wanted to get the heck out of there. Okay, so now we've got this storm going, and the people are suffering badly, awful badly. So they have now managed, here it is, the 27th of October. It is cold. People are freezing. People are dying of starvation and whatever else was down there. Smallpox. Everything was happening. So they get here on the 30th of October. They've gone through Lake Meganic. That was pretty easy. And then they start running into what they call the habitats. Quebecois. The French. Now the French had been told, if you help these men, then we will come and we will burn down your house. And that would mean in the middle of the winter, where you're going to go with your family. But they defied the British. And not only did they defy them with that and helping the people, what they also did, which is a stroke of genius, in order to get across this St. Lawrence River, you had to have a boat. There were no bateaus now serviceable. They were smashed or they were waterlogged or whatever. But what the natives did was really kind of interesting. Because the British said, if we find you with a boat, we're going to destroy that boat. So what the natives did was they took their boats out like canoes, and they put them in the water and they filled them full of rocks and they sunk them. So there were many, many canoes up there able to, when the time came, for them to use them. Okay, so now we're over here. And the habitants are coming down. On October the 30th, they've come across Natassa's teepee. And they find out he'd been there. The coals are still warm. But they also found a note telling them how to go from here. So they were on their way, and so they found out Natassa's was not a bad guy after all. He was a good guy. He was trying to help them come through. Okay, here they are. Now they're coming up. Now remember that the column of men, soldiers, was several miles long, trudging along through a trail. Not in a boat anymore. They were on the shore. And right here on October the 30th, the French people came down and they brought, I have to get a little closer, 5 oxen, 2 horses, and all kinds of wheat in baskets. They came down. They brought those critters to the head of this column. The people who were at the end of the column, all they got to eat were the entrails. The other people ate every single thing. 5 oxen immediately were devoured by these men. So, and the horses, and then the wheat and so forth. So they get up here, and now they're in the Chardonnay River. And that's flowing this way. Now, Arnold had his canoes, but the other thing happened was they started getting these other boats for people, soldiers, so they were able to come out by. By November, we were down now to 400 men, just barely able to survive. And between the 14th and between the 8th and the 14th, there were only 400 left. And they were in pretty bad shape. They were taken in by the French, and they were given food and care and the soldiers who had hated the French because they were not Protestants. They were Catholics. And they didn't know about, they didn't like them. So there was prejudice there. But they found out that it was A-OK. How am I doing?
You got 10,
Okay.
15.
I'll try to get it going. Okay. All right, so now, here they are up here. By the November the 23rd and the 1st of December, they decided that they tried to get across, and with those little canoes and so forth, and they did get across, some of them got across, and because they sneaked over at night, and there was two ships, British ships right in here, but they sneaked by them at night, and they got through, and then the next thing that happened was they decided they couldn't attack. They see that it's impossible to attack this citadel. So what they did is they said, we'll put up a siege. A siege. Montgomery had cannons. So they got some of these cannons and mortars, and they started bombarding the citadel inside. But the siege lasted 5 days, and by that time it is December the 31st. And the men, their enlistment, many of them, was up on the 31st of December, and they wanted to go home. So Arnold and Montgomery gave these guys the old heart-to-heart talk. And all I could think about was the same one, like the one that Eisenhower and Patton and others gave to the GIs when they were going to fight in D-Day. They said, we've come this far. Our objective is here. The word is that there's not many people there, not many soldiers there. We can do this. Will you stay one more day for country, for the honor of this country? And they said yes. So the next day, they attack. Well, those ships I told you, the British ships out there, they took all the soldiers or sailors off that and put them in the citadel running cannons and stuff. So they increased the amount of manpower to about 1,800. So they were against it. The Green Mountain Boys, Montgomery he was satisfied, he was fine. He won Montreal. He won that with no problem. And now he's on the way to try to help. And if he could get there, they would have 1,800 people, 1,800 soldiers to attack. But what happened was, they found out that the people in the castle, in the fort, men, women, and children, not children, but men and women, picked up guns and were defending themselves. So our colonials, my friend Abiel and his buddy Mark attack. Montgomery is killed right off. Arnold is wounded by a ricochet bullet that hit him in the leg. They took him out and took him across and put him in hospital over there with the habitants. The men, Ethan Allen is caught with the Green Mountain Boys, and they're captured and made prisoners. He's captured and he took him to London, and he kept him for 6 years before they let him out. So now the thing collapsed. They had to get out. So they're on their way back across the river, and they're trying to get over into, get some help and food and warmth and so forth. So that collapses. Montgomery failed. Ethan, they're out there. They can't go any further. They fail. So they withdraw. And during the withdrawal, it's snowing. It's snowing. They had a blizzard going on that was just huge. So the boys are coming home, they're coming across, and they've got their guns, they've got their muskets, and when you're doing that in a snowstorm or whatever, you can't keep these things from dry. Anytime water hits in this little pan here, it's over. But so here's Mark Lunn, and I don't know whether he's any related or not, but he's from Connecticut, and I'm still trying to figure out who he is. So he and Abiel and all of his companions were coming back, and they're waiting on the side of the river to get them taken across. There are men there who are wounded, and so Mark puts down his rifle or his musket, and then when he gets back to the other side, the people in charge, military, says, "Where's your musket? You lost your musket? That may cost you your life, because it was bad if you lose your weapon." Court martial. So his comrades, now I've got the list of them, who were there with him, said, "Oh, no. He put the rifle down to pick up a comrade and bring him across because he was wounded." So they exonerated him. So they stayed there, the Colonial stayed there on the other side of the river. And every once in a while they'd go out and take a shot or two at the British. But they were there for a long time, and then they all decided to go home, and I'll try to make this fast. A third of those who were left, sick, tired, whatever, 1/3 of that force decided to go back down through the wilderness again. And as they went down the wilderness, they came across the bodies of their comrades, by now skeletons, because the animals are hungry too. 1/3 of that force went down. There were 4 guys who broke out of prison and made it all the way back by themselves. 4 of them with nothing, no guns, nothing. And I don't know what they ate, probably spruce bugs or something, I don't know. Anyways, so the other 1/3 were imprisoned or wounded, dead, sick. The other 1/3 went with Arnold down the river, through Lake Champlain, and finally the wonderful battle that you can read about at Saratoga. Just a thing on Abiel. At the end of the war, he stayed with the company, Captain Elliot from New Hampshire. They were artillery. Anyway, he stayed with them. And then, at the end of the war, in 1783, he decides that he has got to go and find his mother and father. And he gets on a ship, a schooner, and they go to Gagetown. He goes over to Canada, and he finds them in Gagetown. Not only did he find his mother and father, but he found Elizabeth and Chase. And they court, and they marry, and they have 13 children. And they all went up to Canada and across the border to Bridgewater, to Mars Hill, and Littleton. And my great uncle Charles, no, not Charles, Earl Briggs was a contemporary of my grandfather. He was a brother-in-law to my grandfather. I knew him. And it was incredible. Here's that all the thing went around. John Lunn, who was the loyalist, at the end of the war, he too went to Canada. He went to St. John. And, like a good loyalist, he applies to King George III, and he is granted a petition of land up in what they call the French Lakes. And then, and I've been there, I can tell you, I'm going to say it. I had to pee. I was there on his land. I was looking down the river. Okay. So I get out of the car, and my daughter, oldest daughter, drives me. And I said, wait a minute, I gotta find out. There's a bush over there, I gotta go. So I peed. And I said, John, I'm sorry that I peed on your land, but I had to. So, in the future, what happens is that the Lunns and the Briggs and the Chases all get together. And my good friend, Ed Neubauer, and his wife live in Rhode Island. And Julie sent me an obituary. Revolutionary and Loyalist descendants by Mrs. Copperthwaite at Birch Harbor. And it goes down through here, and if I were to read, here is Abiel Briggs, here's Elizabeth Chase Briggs, here's Copperthwaite. I went to school with Copperthwaite and the Briggses. Earl Briggs, all are here. So, if any of you are thinking at all of ever wanting to be a DAR or be or maybe a loyalist, I can be a loyalist, you know, if I wanted to, then all of you folks here, I stand before you with somewhere inside of me is some DNA or some blood, maybe still, that stood in 1775, 250 years ago, and says, I have freedom, but I do not have liberty. And he was willing to stake his life on it.
So Henry, can you tell us, I mean, you said you knew some of these people. Can you tell us why that would be, perhaps maybe by telling us how old you are?
He does this to me all the time. I gotta hash it. Watch out. I'm 94. I'm very proud of my lineage, just as you are, or anyone, all of you here. Because somewhere along the line, someone in your family had to stand up and say, no more. I want my freedom. I want my liberty. And that's, thank you.
We have time for maybe 4 or 5 questions. Anybody have a question of Henry?
Yes, sir.
Benedict Arnold got shot at the
Right.
Canadian line there, and I was told that he couldn't even ride a horse for a while.
Later.
Yeah.
It was a wound. It was a ricochet bullet. Got him in here. And because when he went to Saratoga,
He was shot again.
on the way down. Now, if you want a story, another story, that's a good one. How they went from there to how he went there, and how he saved that battle at Saratoga. He had troubles later on.
Someone else over here. Yes, Jed.
Simple question. How long does it take an adept person to reload a musket?
How long does it take to
To reload a musket.
To reload.
Oh.
Someone that knows what they're
Okay.
doing.
You wanted to be able to fire
a minute.
3 shots a minute. Now, I used to demonstrate that, and it's quite a trick. I can get about 2. But, yeah, 3 minutes. But the thing about that is that, remember, there's a guy over there who is trying to do the same thing to you.
Diane.
Say, Diane.
Yeah, well, one of Lincolnville's famous ancestors is Philip Ulmer, and he was on Lake Champlain, and he was captaining a ship
Yes.
that sunk, and they are trying to raise that ship out of the bottom of Lake Champlain even now. I mean, that was long ago. But he's ended up in Lincolnville. He was like one of the first selectmen, treasurer.
Is he still alive?
Yeah, unfortunately. But he lived
His brother.
at Duck Trap.
Yeah.
And his brother George lived in the big house on the other side, and he had a house that was duplicate of that on this side of the Duck Trap. That house is burned,
Where Camp DeForest is now.
or Camp DeForest is now. And they didn't know about that.
If it hadn't been for Arnold, because when they came down through the canal, through the river and into the lakes, they were being chased by the British on ships. They went into the forest during the winter time, or before the winter, and they built about 12 boats, which was just long enough to keep the British, and then the river, the lake froze. And that's when Arnold came down and joined the army. But there's a picture of Arnold, and the English, the Colonials were not doing very well at that battle. And he gets on a horse, and he pulls out his saber, because he had been passed over for any kind of command. They didn't want him near it. He gets on this horse, and he rides down, and he rallies the men, and that's how that battle was won.
Getting back to Lincolnville, we have, I can take you there if you want to make an appointment. We have John Heel, who was a Revolutionary soldier. And we think he may be buried there in the old settlers cemetery. We also have, and I don't know where he served or how he served or what else. We have Lieutenant Norton, which we have Norton's barn.
Also in that cemetery.
Yes, but in the old cemetery.
There's Collier.
Yes,
I just got a quick question. You showed that little thing with all the little bullets there.
Yes.
It had like 6.
Right.
So, if you're trying to shoot 3 in a minute, you're kinda, how many of those
You got
had
2
to carry?
minutes.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Then
make
you
some more.
Yeah.
hide behind a rock or something and fill it up.
But so in other words, with just little rocks, whatever you found, I mean,
Well, okay,
they wouldn't fit in your gun if they weren't made for it, right?
this has got powder, or not powder, it's got shot in it and flint. So you had extras, and that's when you would load up again. You would just load now by hand, and this was known as a patch knife, and you would put your shirt tail, and you'd haul your shirt tail out, and you would put the ball on top of the shirt tail, and you'd take your ramrod and start driving it in, and then you'd cut off what you didn't need. The shirt tail.
that's why you froze to death.
Yeah.
When you got there, you
Sure,
had to
sure,
coach.
after a while.
This was called the All Possible Bag, and it has everything in it, including my Bible, and flint, there's other things in there. My razor.
I don't know how anybody killed anybody with guns.
Yes, last question.
I'm curious what the connection is between Henry Knox going up to Quebec to bring the cannon back.
That was later. He went to Ticonderoga
Oh, okay.
and brought the cannon. And if you're familiar with the Berkshires, and my wife is from the Berkshires.
Yeah.
If you're ever familiar with that, think about all of Mount Batty,
Yeah,
several of them in a row.
Yeah.
He brought those down through.
So there's no connection between Henry Knox and Arnold.
They knew each other.
Okay.
Because he was part of the command, Washington's command. Yep. This is what you carried in your hat, folks. Liberty or death. That was the motto.
Thank you very much, Henry.
All right, thank you.